episode 99 of the CRICKETher Weekly. We're a bit zombified because we were up all night and this morning watching the second ODI, although thanks England for wrapping it up a little bit quicker because it meant that we got to go back to bed about an hour and a half before we were expecting to. So cheers for that. We're going to deal with the current state of the main Ashes series a little bit later in the episode, but we thought that we'd start by reflecting on the England A v Australia A series that wrapped up earlier this week, and most of the England A squad have now flown back to Heathrow, haven't they, Sid?
Yep.
So you wrote a piece for CRICKETher about the England A tour, didn't you?
Yeah. Overall, it was a tough time for the England A team. So there were 6 games. There were 3 T20s and 3 one-dayers. One game was rained off halfway through, and the other 5 games they lost. For the first T20 was quite close. Alice Capsey got a sort of 40 off 20 balls, and Australia chased them down with like 3 balls to spare, and it was quite promising at that point. But things kind of went downhill from there really, and they ended up not winning a single game. Right. So. It was, a little birdie tells us that Charlotte Edwards, who was coaching the side at the beginning and has been there with them for the duration of the tour, said at one point after one of those matches, she said, "Girls, there are good days and school days." And unfortunately, there were rather more school days than good days on this tour. There were some bright sparks though, so there are some positives in terms of individual performances.
Taking
so Alice
the positives.
Absolutely. Alice Capsey had a good T20 series. Emma Lamb had a really good series. She continues to kind of stake her claim as being definitely the best potential option for coming into the main England side at the top of the order. Lauren Bell had a good series and ended up getting a sort of call up into the test squad. They didn't use her in the end, but Lauren Bell was one of 4 players that they kind of kept behind at the end. So there were 4 players who didn't fly back because they were being kept in the England bubble, with England keeping their options open in terms of taking them to the World Cup.
That's exciting.
So they were Lauren Bell and Emma Lamb, which I've talked about, as well as Eve Jones and George Elwes. So all of those could potentially still go to the World Cup. Everyone else has kind of been released from the bubble. We understand a couple of people have stayed in Australia. They're going to go and play club cricket, which is probably a good use of their time.
Yep.
Much better than coming back here and shivering in Loughborough. And Alice Capsey has got needs to go back and worry about her A levels now. So and there'll be a few people going back to to finish their degrees and things like Lauren Bell back, but she'll be back to Loughborough. So Raf, reflecting on it, how do we feel? Was it essentially all a waste of time, or?
Well, the results don't look great, do they? And I've certainly seen a few tweets basically saying, can any England team manage to win a match in Australia this winter?
Actually, Raf,
yeah,
the England A team did win 3 matches in Australia.
Oh.
Against the England side in the warm-ups.
Okay, so all those tweets are rubbish because an England team has beaten a team in Australia. It was another England team.
The England A team beat the England main team.
Great. Well, no, of course it wasn't a pointless waste of time. These things never are, even if you get heavily beaten in every match that you play. And as you say, there was that one close match at the beginning, and there are some positives to come out of it in terms of individual development. I think that just the experience of being in Australia will have been really valuable for some of those players. For a lot of them, it would have been their first time on a tour like that. So it was a great initiative, and certainly something that they should absolutely be doing more of, as should many other countries. I'd love to see more of those kind of parallel tours, and I don't really see any reason why there shouldn't be more of them.
Absolutely.
So there's that. It does feel to me, I haven't kind of gone through the numbers in terms of an age analysis, but it feels like the Australia A side was full of, or it was a bit more full of players who have actually kind of earned their stripes a bit for Australia, the main Australia side. So people like Elise Perry was making appearances for Australia A team during the T20 series, wasn't she, to try and warm up? People like, I don't know, Georgia Redmayne, Elise Villani. Villani's had a very long and successful career for Australia, obviously, and it's just kind of not quite making the cut at the moment. Whereas the England A team, there were some young players like Alice Capsey. Yes, a few of the others were kind of in their late 20s, but that we're talking about people like like Eve Jones, for example, who's never really been on a tour for England, and so is therefore less experienced. So I think that there was perhaps a slight mismatch in terms of experience between the two sides. I think we have to factor that in. And overall, yes, it does show that Australia have got much more depth than England. Is that something that we didn't know 3 months ago? No, it's not. No. It's not surprising that Australia are winning these matches because of the levels of investment that have gone into Australian domestic cricket over the last few years, and that's the reason why you've got players like T-Mac, Talia McGrath, and Alana King now in their kind of mid to late 20s, who are finally coming good for the main Australia side. Previously, they might well have both retired from cricket by now because they would have had to be making a living. But actually, yep. as it happens, they haven't, and that's where you're getting this incredible depth from.
Yeah, and the Australia, I mean, obviously the sides changed a lot even during the games. That was one thing that remains a slight disappointment for me, was that they weren't proper kind of full-on, laws of the game games. They were allowed to swap out players. You had 12 players playing. You had players that didn't bat, players that didn't bowl. I would have preferred to see proper games, but as it is, they didn't do that, and that's okay. That's a call they made. But what we largely had was an England team that were of a top three that had one cap between them. So Eve Jones, Alice Capsey and Emma Lamb in the top three, whereas we had an Australia team with Elise Villani up top, who's got 50 odd caps and will absolutely take to pieces bad bowling or in naive bowling anyway, not even bad bowling, but naive bowling in WBBL. And then Georgia Redmayne, who's definitely she's like Australia's next player down from the international side. Obviously, she's got any caps at all, Georgia Redmayne? I can't remember offhand. But
didn't she play a game against India?
But anyway, so she's only got a couple, if that. But the point is that she's a very experienced player and a player definitely a step above.
Yeah, so, and you'd have to think that actually that the gap between the domestic setups is not necessarily going to change, and in fact, I do worry that it's only going to grow. We talk about England being 5 years behind Australia at the moment, but Australia seem to be continually investing more in their domestic setup, whereas it feels to me like what's happening in England is that there's this kind of almost this sense amongst those at the ECB, they're going, oh well, we've already invested loads of money in the women's domestic structure over the last couple of years, and almost actually a little bit too much. What have we been doing that for? Rather than what I think happened in Australia 5 years ago, which was, oh well, let's push ever more money in, and we're not even at a point where our domestic structure is kind of 50% professional yet, whereas Australia are already 100%, and so and I just feel that the kind of the ethos or the sort of philosophy at the ECB isn't necessarily pushing for that increased investment, which is what we really need.
Yeah, there was a great article in the Guardian yesterday by Barney Ronay about the situation at the ECB, and it was sort of opinion piece. And what he was basically pointing out was that the ECB are in a situation where they have £2 million at their disposal, and they go, now shall we invest this money in the future of the game, or shall we pay ourselves huge bonuses? And guess which one they chose, guys. And people at the ECB can go, well, the bonuses were written into contracts created years ago, but look, there was nothing to stop the people that received those bonuses at the time they received them going, no, I don't want them, I hand them back, it's not right to take that at the moment, that £2 million should go into the game. Now we can debate where that £2 million might actually have gone, and I can just certainly hear fans of the men's county teams going, well, that £2 million should be coming to us. And obviously women's cricket fans are going, well, some of that should be coming to us as well. And you can have that debate, but at the end of the day, that £2 million has gone into the pockets of senior executives at the ECB, and that feels like money that really should have been invested in the future of the game. Definitely go and read Barney Ronay's piece in the Guardian yesterday. It's available online as well. Guardian.co.uk.
Okay. So that's kind of the A side of things. Let's talk about the main Ashes, Sid.
We have to.
What situation are we currently in as we record this podcast, Sid?
Well, it's not a good one, Raph.
No.
As somebody once said, there are good days and school days. No, it's not been much fun from an England perspective. I mean, we had obviously the end of the Test last weekend, and England put in a positive performance in the last innings, and nearly got there, but
Feels like quite a long time ago, doesn't it? After these
Yeah.
first two ODIs.
and we've had two kind of disasters in the first two ODIs, really, haven't we? What have you made of those two matches, Raf? As you've been propping your eyes open with matchsticks.
Well, you say disasters. I think on both occasions, England's bowlers have really stepped up. It was the batters that really let England down in that first ODI, chasing a really low total. You're not going to get much lower against Australia, are you? And they should have made those runs, and they didn't. And then in the second ODI today, it was all about England's batters totally failed to set a competitive total, and so there's not a huge amount you can do with that as a bowler. They did their best. They took 6 wickets in the end. So I know that there were a lot of balls remaining, but if they'd had like 40 or 50 more runs to work with, then we could have been looking at a different result. So I think.
Okay, so let's talk about the bowling in specific then, Raf. What are the positives we're looking at there?
Well, it's been all Kate Cross, hasn't it? Obviously, there was a lot of talk about Catherine Brunt having bowled so well in the test. Personally, I think that Kate Cross bowled brilliantly in the test and was really unfortunate not to pick up any wickets. I think in these first two ODIs, she's bowled brilliantly. She's been showcasing what we saw a bit from her in our English summer against India and New Zealand in those two bilateral series. She's been doing it again out in Australia against the best in the world. She's been really worrying and nagging, consistently bowling a good length to the Australian batters and really troubling them, and getting really good seam movement as well. That's really tricky to face, and actually just seems to have so much control over the way that she's moving
fantastic
the seam.
ball today to get Meg Lanning out by bowling her through the gate. So
Meg Lanning's becoming her bunny.
Yeah.
To believe the term. So that's not a bad bunny to have in your bag. So that's been brilliant from Kate Cross, and we actually had a tweet aimed at us. I think this was during the first ODI from Michael Perkins, basically highlighting the advances that Kate Cross has made in the last 12 months and saying, what do we put those improvements down to? So what do you think, Sid?
Well, I think it's a really good question. I think that there's big parallels between Kate Cross and Alana King, so who's made 3 different debuts for Australia in the space of a few days.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned this on commentary. Apparently, Sarah Taylor made her debuts more quickly than this, but it's the second quickest from the first debut to the third.
Yeah.
So yeah, what Alana King's done over the years. So Alana King was always capable of having a great 3 or 4 balls and bowling a good spell, but she was wildly inconsistent. But the position she's got to is that she's kind of cut out all the bad balls. She really understands her game really well. She understands exactly what she needs to do. She takes the plans on board. She bowls to the plans, and she'll bowl 5.5 good balls every single over. And Kate Cross really very similar. So she's obviously developed a maturity that gives her a real genuine understanding of her game. She's cut out the bad balls. She's only bowling good balls, and it's being really effective. And it's showing that a quick bowler doesn't have to just be fast. That if you can bowl very consistently, it's the same plan that's allowed James Anderson in the men's team to carry on way beyond where anyone would reasonably expect him to be able to, because he really knows his own game very well and bowls to the plans and keeps sticking to those the right lines and lengths for each batter.
I have to say, I think that there's something mentally that's been important to Kate Cross's improvement as well. It does feel like, having listened to her quite a lot on the Nobles podcast, talking about her struggles with mental health, that's been quite a difficult, tricky issue for her over the last few years. And obviously, if you're not if you don't feel that you're bowling well, then for her, she kind of gets into her own head and she bowls worse. Whereas if she has a few good performances, then she thinks, oh, I'm actually kind of worth my place in the team, and she bowls better. And obviously, we always say cricket's a mental game as well, but I think there are some players that it's especially a mental game for, and I think she's one of them. Potentially some credit actually to Heather Knight and Lisa Kitely have clearly said to her and communicated to her over the last 6 months or so, saying, actually, we think that you're really worth your place in the ODI 11. We want you to be our first change bowler, and we want you to do this role, and we think you can do it. And I think somehow that's given her the mental confidence that she's needed. And
she has absolutely stepped up to it, because if you look at her career up to like 2019, when she was kind of dropped from the one day side. She averaged 1 wicket per game. Since her return, she's averaging 2 wickets per game. And that's just like shows the another level that she's moved to. So
Yeah,
it's really
definitely.
great news.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've
And
kind
everyone
of
else has bowled well, haven't they, as well, where Raf? It's not just Kate Cross. Anya Shrubsole's, been on top of her game as well.
Yeah, definitely. So the Australian commentators, some of them seem to be quite surprised at the amount of swing that she's getting, but that's Anya Shrubsole at her best. She swings it probably more than anyone in the world, certainly more than any of the Australian bowlers. I guess that Shika Pandey might have something to say about that. But yeah, no, she's been good as well. And we've already kind of mentioned Catherine Brunt doing so well in the test. It looks like, she was rested for today's ODI, and it looks like to me that she's probably going to be rested for the third one as well, because they are kind of a little bit concerned about the forthcoming World Cup and trying to keep her in trim for that. So we'll have to see what happens. But yeah, so we've kind of taken the positives there, Sid, as much as we probably can, and I do think that we should deal with the not so positives, which is the batting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not been great, has it? As particularly in the last 2 ODIs. Where are we at with that? Gosh, well, okay. So there's been a lot of talk on social media about Lauren Winfield, and I think we should address that first of all. And I do first of all want to say repeat what I said on Twitter, that that this is absolutely nothing personal against Lauren Winfield. Lauren Winfield is absolutely a stand-up person. She's a great person to have on the team. She's a great person to have on your side. She's a great mate to people. And just a really nice human, and that's one of the things that makes this all quite difficult. And you kind of, but she has been struggling, and it's been an awful long time since she's passed 50 for England. That's 2016 since she last passed 50 for England. She's had nearly 50 innings in order to try and pass that mark since, and she hasn't done so. But I want to just point out that actually this really isn't about Lauren Winfield, because everybody has failed in this one-day series.
Yeah.
So, yes, Lauren Winfield hasn't done great, but Tammy Beaumont's failed, Heather Knight's failed, Sophia Dunkley's failed, Amy Jones has failed, Nat Siver has failed even. Nat Siver reached 40 in the first game, but that was a 40 where she really needed to push on. That's what Beth Mooney did, which was actually the difference between the 2 teams in the first game.
Okay.
So England's batting unit have really let everything down, and it just feels like a bit of an inversion, because last summer we were feeling so confident about the batting unit, and they were looking so good, but they've kind of tripped over, fallen flat on their faces in Australia, and we're going to go into the World Cup, it looks like, with a very difficult kind of situation hanging over them. Is there anything they can do about it? Emma Lamb obviously is an option to come in. They've left themselves with that option, but will they use it?
Or Eve Jones as a left-hander.
Well, yeah, Eve Jones actually also has something to offer. I think that while full credit to Eve Jones for everything she's achieved and upping her game in the past few years, I think that Emma Lamb would have a right to feel very aggrieved if Eve Jones was brought in and she wasn't.
Yeah, but it's that left-hander, right-hander thing, isn't it, that England haven't had since Lydia Greenway retired.
There is something to that, and so that's another option. Obviously, both of those choices would basically, I think, mean that it will be Lauren Winfield that would give way, but it's actually not about Lauren Winfield. It's about the whole batting unit hasn't been clicking. Maybe they will come together in New Zealand and they will click, but right now it's feeling like they're definitely overwhelmingly the second best side in the world.
Yeah, there were a couple of comments on my piece today that I'm just going to read out, which speak to that point. One was from the Red Rose Renegade, who says the plain fact was emphasised by Ebony Rainford Brent on the preamble to the match on BT. Ability-wise, the difference between Australia and England is not huge. However, the desire, grit and guts to win between the individuals in the teams is hugely different. England seem too timid, and especially the batters, who don't seem to be able to stick in and say, "You get me out," and frequently surrendered their wickets either by sitting back and getting LBW or playing irrational attacking shots instead of pushing the ball around and gathering runs.
Yeah, the one person that was doing that was Sophie Eccleston, who actually has enhanced her batting reputation. And yeah, so it was a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, but when you're relying on what was she batting at, number 9? That's not great. Then there was a slightly shorter comment, but a great one from the Faith Flow, who says England batting looking tired and uninspired. That's also how I feel watching these ODIs. imagine going into quarantine feeling flat as a pancake, really needs something from the last ODI. And that's obviously a bit of a concern, that after this series, they're going to be going into their 10 days hard quarantine in New Zealand. And I've talked about this before on the podcast, that actually it's all about that kind of mental feeling that you take into the quarantine. And if you're going into it feeling really flat and demoralised and like Australia have just kind of crapped all over you, I was nearly going to say a rude word then that's not great going into the World Cup, and that really is a concern. Another question here, just to maybe look to wrap things up, from Michael Perkins. Will we look back at this Australian team since the 2017 World Cup as a truly great side, which is also raising England's game? Sid, what do you make of that?
I think that, are they a truly great side? They need to win a World Cup to prove it. But
well, give it a couple of months and they will have, and then give it another couple of months and I think that they will have won a Commonwealth Games gold medal as well. I think that there's no doubt that we will look back on this Australian team as a great side. And I think, as I've said earlier in the episode, partly that does come down to the incredible investment that there's been in their domestic structure. So yeah, I think that we have to take that into account. But yeah, I think there's no doubt that we'll look back on this Australian side as a great one. Does that mean that they're raising England's game? To be honest, to me it feels a little bit like the opposite, that actually there's something about Ashes cricket and this Australian side where England get into their heads and they just don't play in the confident way that they play against any other side in the world somehow.
They just don't believe they can win at the moment. That was really in the body language today. It was really most unfortunate that, you know, they just looked like a side that had already accepted that this was absolutely all over, and they wished they were somewhere else, unfortunately.
Well, they'll be in New Zealand in a quarantine hotel soon enough. Okay, well, we've got one more ODI to go, so maybe England can salvage something from that. Fingers crossed. Otherwise, that's it from us for now. See you in a week's time. Bye.
Bye.